Right, welcome back to the channel where we are building a video game from scratch using Love2d and Lua. We're working on this Lute mini game here, and we're hoping to get some bass notes working and playing on a loop so that we can... There's two things you get when you find the tablature for the music. You get the bass notes that end up repeating, and then you play the melody on top of the bass notes that end up repeating. So we need a system where it first prompts you to play the bass notes, and if you get all of those correct, it will then send you to the melody part where you play the melody, and hopefully the melody is in sync with the bass notes looping. So we'll be trying that. Now I think, like right now, this third argument of our note class is the amount of seconds until the next subsequent note gets instantiated. So that being a 1 means that every note, if given a 1, will come on 1 second apart from one another. So if we want some factor to speed this up by so that it's faster than 1 note per second, we'd have to figure out how to tweak this in a way that makes sense. But let's just see if we can get, let's just, get string 4, 3, 2, 1 looping at any sort of consistent interval. And then we'll have to, what's tricky is we'll have to make sure that, I don't know how to do this math backwards, because by the time the note's instantiated is not the time that the note matches the beatbox by the time it scrolls over. So I don't know how to tell it. To kind of sync those two things up. So let's just try to give it a shot and see. We might need a new class, but essentially all we're trying to do is play 4 different sounds in looping fashion. So if we look at our sounds table when we play, we've got these. I believe our notes going from bottom up is F1, A1, D1, F2. So we have to find a way to play these sounds every second and play the next sound every second. So I'm kind of thinking we might need a BassNotes class that takes in a parameter of, or it takes in a table of which notes to cycle through, and then it'll keep track of whatever, how do we do that? It would keep track of whatever note played last so that the next note can be the next note. And if the next note is the last note, then the next note is the first note, so that it can loop permanently. So I think we want, because I'm trying to think if we want to build out the pseudocode for this, it might be for note in BassNote, if BassNote's time elapsed, then go ahead and play the next note, then reset time elapsed, then increment current note. If current note is last note, cycle back to first note, and then update over delta time so that we can get that looping 4-note rhythm. So I think we will need a class here to make our lives easier. So we can stub out a fake class here that we can then build. So let's try to call this BassNotes 1, because we're going to have 5 different songs total, so I'm just going to say BassNotes 1 gets an instantiation. Now, we can do this a couple different ways. I think we can try to give ourselves one class that handles all that stuff, and I think we'll try doing that first. So like we'll call BassNotes as a class here, and the notes we want to give it are we can either take in a string of which note we want to play, or we can take in a string and a fret, or we can take in a note instantiation, which actually kind of makes sense. So maybe our BassNotes table or our BassNotes class might get 4 different notes, and then we'll cycle through each note. I think that makes sense. We'll try that. But I'm not exactly sure how that'll go over. So let's just try one note for now, so we don't get too ahead of ourselves. So we're saying our BassNotes class is going to take in as a parameter a table at which the first index is a note instantiation. So if we can get our BassNotes to be updating over time, and every time 1 second elapses, go ahead and play the only note that is in that BassNotes table. If we can get that going, then we can start building out the rest of the class there. So we'll have to go require this class that we don't even have yet, but we can put it in here, and we'll just put it in our dependencies here, and we'll say, okay, we'll require our BassNotes with an S Lua file. And then we'll go in here and make sure we're in source, which we are, and we'll make a BassNotes.Lua class, and we'll give ourselves the class here. BassNotes. We have to do one thing first, which is we have to say BassNotes gets class curly brace. That's how we get our class library, and then we need a init function, which will take in the parameter. We will need the update function, which takes in delta time. And we'll need a render function. We won't need a render function because we're not rendering anything. All we're doing is playing the sound from our global sound table. So I'm going to say that this takes in notes. And since we put it in a table, I think we should be able to cycle through and say self.note1 is assigned to whatever our notes are at index 1. Let's see if that's the case. Now, another thing that's tricky is our global sound table is linked by the actual note string that it is. So I think it would actually make more sense to pass in a table of notes as in strings and save that as a self.note. So what that would look like is in our play state here. Instead of a table of notes, passing in a note doesn't really help us because the note doesn't know what sound to play. Actually, it technically does, but we don't have a way to trigger it just based on the string and fret. So I'm kind of thinking that we give it a table, and we'll say it's a table of strings, and the strings are equivalent to whatever values that we're trying to global sounds : play. So let's say our BassNotes only got one F1 sound in there. Let's go to our BassNotes, which we don't have harpooned just yet. And we'll say, and I've been trying to make a habit of putting the things I'm working on in the harpoon right here. so that we have easier access to them. So now my bass notes are here on my middle finger. Cool. So we've got play state, bass notes. Okay. Okay, so now notes 1 should be the actual string value of F1. And we're saying self.note1 gets that F1. And then we also need a timer that is going to get set to 0. And we're going to say, because this is kind of functioning like a metronome, right? So like this needs to be like clockwork. So we're going to say self timer gets our current timer plus our change in time since last frame. Then if self timer is greater than, let's say, 1 second, then we're going to go ahead and play from our global sounds table at our note 1 for now. Well, we don't want to hard code this, but for now, I just want to see if we can pass in strings and play sounds here. And then once self timer is greater than 1, we also need to flush our timer back to 0 so we can trigger it more than once. So all we're doing is playing a sound from our global table every 1 second. And the sound we're playing is the string that we pass in to our table of our bass notes instantiation, and we already required our new class, so I'm hoping we will get it. Nothing's coming out because we're not actually calling this update function on our bass notes. So let's go to our play state, and we will take our bass notes 1, and we'll make sure we update that every frame. So let's say bass notes 1, we're going to update, passing in delta time. Let's see. So I'm not playing anything, and we've got the note. Okay, so we've got bass notes playing on a loop. Now, we have to check, you know, we only want to play these notes if you've correctly played the first 4 bass notes of the song. But right now it's just about trying to get it to work and seeing what a metronome of 1 second kind of sounds like to see if that's appropriate. So let's try to figure out how to give more than one note. So let's say we wanted it to be decrementing on all strings. So, you know, top string to bottom string. That would mean that our F2 is the first one, and then our D1 is our second note. Now let's see if we can get these 2 notes alternating. We'd have to go into our bass notes class, and we have to keep track of a current note. And then we'd have to also keep track of a total notes. They'll all be 4, I'm thinking, but if we want to change it, we'll be able to change it. So let's just say that there's a current note, and we'll set the current note to be 1, the first index of the parameter. Then let's just try to see if we can alternate this note, or let's just see if we can play the second note instead of the first note, if just by switching that. Yeah, so that does come out the other note, so that means our tables are formatted correctly. So what we want to do here is not play our self note 1, we want to play our notes no, we want to play basically our current note. Oh, see, but then this is we can't just do this because this is looking for a string. So our self note is the our self note 1 is the value of the note string. Okay, so I think what we want to do is pull out all our notes. Each note as a string gets pulled into its own variable here so that we can access each note individually and after the init. So we'll try this. So we do want a way to index which one of these notes based on the number, not the string. So like, I'm trying to think of a decent way to do this. We can put it, yeah, I think we just put it, okay. I think all we should do is put our notes into a table we can access, and then we can do self notes at index current note to get whatever sound. So if we wanted to see what that looks like, we can say, now let's do self notes at index whatever our current note is and play that sound. So now if our current note is 1, we should hear the lower, not the lower, we actually started with the high note, then a lower note. So let's hear what current note 1 sounds like. Kind of high, and then if we go to current note 2, that should be the D1, which is lower. Yes. Okay, so if we were to come into our play state and give us the last 2 notes here, we should be able to say A1 and F1 all as a string, because that's what our table, our global sounds table, is expecting. So now let's continue to walk it down. What's the third note? It should be lower, and then the lowest. Okay, so our current note is working, so now we just need to update our current note over this timer. So we're just going to say if self.current note is currently equal to 4, then we want to set the current note back to 1. I guess we could do a modulo here. But otherwise, we want to increment our current note by 1. So we will assign our current note to our current note plus 1. And then we're going to play the sound, and then we're going to reset the timer. So this should be incrementing our current note, and that's defining which song we play. We have a total of 4 different notes playing right now, so let's hear if they cycle through from high to low. Yeah. So I'm not convinced the strings down is the best bass melody to have, but at least now we can play around with playing a melody on top of notes. So I think the bass note sequence I might actually want, and what I can do is just stop playing this for now while I try this. Just want to figure out what I want to play. Okay, I'm gonna try that. Just a walk down half step, right? So okay, let's try that. I believe, what would that make our notes? We would want F1 to be our last, and then G1, and then, is it B flat here? B flat 1, and then maybe C1. Let's see. So like the sound I'm looking for when we turn it back on is da 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 da. So let's see. We want our bass notes playing. Let's hear it. Not quite, not quite. So I'm missing some notes here. I'm trying to remember the scale I put in there. If we land on F, B1, okay, B flat 1 should be the first note, then A, then G. Sorry for the crash, y'all. G1, and then F1. So yeah, maybe more than 4 notes, or maybe we just make it breathe a bit more so it's longer than 1 note. So one tricky thing I want to see is if we give all of the notes that are flying in 1 second, does that mean our 1 second bass notes are timing up with that same 1 second? I don't know. So I want to at least see that. Let's see if they time up. yeah, I don't see it timing up. So that's going to be a tough one to reconcile, because it's like the speed, I guess the self dot speed of whatever our notes are is what's controlling how fast they scroll across the screen, but that isn't tied to any sort of timing for the other stuff on a loop. So it's almost like we need to manipulate the speed, the self dot speed of the fret notes to either be synchronous with like one of the seconds at a time, right? Like we need to adjust it till it's right on one of those seconds, or give it a sort of, I don't want to say give it like an offset time to spawn so that we can just tweak it so it's correct. But actually that kind of makes sense, because what we don't want to do is to have too many factors that change it. So like we don't want the time in between the notes changing it as the same time as the speed of the notes changing it, as well as the global note or global bass notes timer set changing it. Oh gosh, man, we're just crashing all over the place. So I kind of want to experiment with doing like an offset for the notes coming in, so that we can tweak, because the notes coming in, we give it the same period of time, 1 second, that our bass notes are being played upon. So if we had the timing right, they should be synchronous, right? Like if we have, because the time in between the notes is the same, just like the time in between the bass notes are the same. So as long as we get the timing correct, they should all line up. So maybe we have because the game isn't checking whether or not you're hitting the note on the correct time as the bass notes. It's checking if you're hitting it in correct time with the notes, just the note class. So maybe we can do something. I'm thinking, either would it be easier to offset the timing of the bass notes as opposed to the other notes, or would it make more sense to be able to tweak the notes? I'm not sure. Let's just see if we can tweak the timing of the bass notes and see if this idea even works, and then we can worry about maybe doing it better. So like, let's just say we have a timing offset, and we're going to set it to 0 initially. And I think we only want to start updating the timer if our timing offset is passed. I'm sure there's a better way to do this, but let's just see if we can get this to work. So like, we're going to say self-timing offset is going to get increased by delta time. And then if the timing offset is greater than, let's say 0.25 or whatever, to shift it by 1/4 of a second, then we're gonna I don't know what we want to do, but let's just say if self-timing offset's over there, then we want to update our self-timer. So now, let's see, that should offset it. Let's see if there may be a little more in time now. Let's see. Let's try 0.3. Well, yeah, let's try maybe less, because we were just a bit late, right? So let's try 1/5 of a second sooner. Yeah, we're just a bit late, so we want this to happen sooner, so let's try 0.10. I don't know if this is even working, but yeah, it doesn't seem to be doing anything. Let's see if we have 10 seconds. The notes shouldn't play for 10 seconds, so yeah. Let's try to get this working so it plays right when those notes are coming in. But this is all finicky, right? This is all like temperamental timing. So that was a little too late. So let's try 4.5. We don't want it all temperamental like this. We want to know exactly when the note's going to play and exactly when the notes... That looks pretty close, actually. Yeah, I'm going to go back to the play state, and we're going to give only timings of 1, so we don't have any weird spacings there. And then they should all line up. Sounds bad, but it timed up, right? It looked like every note was on the beat that was playing, so that was good. Okay. So there's a lot of moving parts here, because if we wanted to change the tempo of the notes, we'd have to also change the tempo of the bass notes, which also alters the timing of which they come in at the same time. So I don't know exactly how to scale this to where we can give it different timings for the notes as well as different timings for the bass notes. Like ideally we give it one value, like a beats per minute, or a quarter note per second, because right now there's 1 quarter note per second. I mean, yeah, and ideally we can speed up. Yeah, ideally this instead of it being hard coded to a number like 1, ideally we can give it a range, and we can say, okay, well maybe 360 is the equivalent of 1 per second, so that we can fine tune it and say, okay, it needs to be like 2.5 times faster, so let's give it a BPM of 440, or something like that, where we can, like, ideally we can scale it without, because what's tricky is that if we give it, like if we give this note a 2 seconds, then it's twice as long, right? It's 2 seconds in between each one instead of 1, and that's just too fast. Like ideally we would kind of want the ability to kind of do like a flourish on a chord, which is like faster than 16ths even. Sorry, we keep crashing, man. I'm probably gonna call it here soon because I'm a little sleepy, but I want to figure out a way to get this going so that we can tweak it manageably and have the bass notes perfectly in sync with the start of each note, so that we don't even have to worry about that. We can change the speed as needed, and it doesn't affect the synchronicity of the melody and the bass notes. So hopefully we can figure that out. I don't exactly know how, but all we did was add our BassNote class with some timing for our notes. If we do a get add all and then a get diff cached, we should be able to see the new class we wrote for our bass notes as well as the other changes we did. But I'm going to go ahead and commit with a message saying that we are added BassNote class and BassNotes table. So at least we got looping music working. We need to be able to scale it so it can take different timings as well as different amounts of notes. And then once we're at that point, we can either decide whether or not we're going to be moving forward with this current note selection, or if we want to potentially do a different scale or a different set of notes entirely. You know, we don't know. So once this method is in there, we can then make those bigger decisions. So I'm going to go ahead and get push, and then I don't even think I can raid out if I'm not officially streaming, can I? But I'll try to raid out. Sorry for the delays, or sorry for the crashes, but have a good night, and I'll be back here tomorrow, hopefully with less issues.